While on a space mission, tragedy strikes, as the space station is destroyed when an experiment goes wrong. After returning home, this woman discovers that things don't seem the same as they used to be, even though everything looks the same. A woman drives a car on the night highway, with her young daughter in the back seat. As they drive along, they hear an unknown woman's voice on the radio speaking Russian. The girl, Alice, asks her mother, Jo, what the woman is saying, and she tells her daughter that the woman is saying that the world is turning upside down. As they drive, a police car appears behind them, leading to an unidentified object in the vehicle to start blinking. Jo is nervous, but is relieved when the police car passes by. Eventually, they end up at a small cottage. Jo lights a fire and Alice begins listening to a bedtime story. With Alice distracted, Jo heads outside to check on the device. She hears Alice scream and rushes to her side. However, Alice is asleep when Jo checks on her and she returns outside. After hearing Alice scream again, she runs off into the forest. 5 weeks ago, Jo had a mission to do a spacewalk, alongside her fellow astronauts. She only spoke to Alice and her husband Magnus through video call. She spoke to Alice, showing her the ship's captain, Paul, putting together a device by following instructions from scientist Henry Caldera on Earth. The device was meant to detect a new state of matter, although no one knew what it was. Suddenly, something crashed into the ship, and the space station caught on fire. All communication with Earth was lost. Amongst the chaos, Paula's hand was trapped, and they decided to amputate it. One of the Soyuz ships was non-functional, so Jo went out to check the damage. She found severe damage to the power supply due to the collision. The video connection with Jo was disrupted, and they could only hear her voice down on Earth. As Jo headed over to the secondary ship, she found the shriveled body of a female astronaut in a USSR orange spacesuit. She learned that the body was what crashed into the ship. She tried to grab it, but the body managed to float away. Her partner managed to bring her closer to the ship, and she told everyone what she saw. Irina, the leader of Roscosmos, a space corporation for space activities by Russia, heard about this dead woman back on Earth. The team worked to save Paul, but he went into cardiac arrest and passed away, despite CPR being performed on him. The command center ordered 3 of the crew members to escape in Soyuz 2, while Jo remained to fix Soyuz 1. Magnus and Alice were informed of the accident and of Jo remaining in space. As the crew members were about to leave, she asked a crew member to take care of Alice and Magnus. Meanwhile, Magnus and Alice are flown to Roscosmos Cosmodrome in Baikonur, Kazakhstan for further updates, along with Paulo's family. Jo entered Soyuz 1, which was only powered through solar panels, after grabbing Alice's necklace. She noticed Paulo's deceased body strapped in the seat next to her. While she waited, she drew the body of the astronaut woman she found and sent it off to the command center. Jo began to notice strange things, such as time passing by fast. As morning approached, Jo left the pod to find the batteries that she needed to fix the ship. She began the necessary repairs, determined to head home. Irene informed Henry that she ordered the members to leave his device on board because it may have caused the accident, but he insisted on asking Jo to retrieve it. Meanwhile, crew members of Soyuz 2 landed safely and were greeted on Earth. Jo was informed that she needed to retrieve the experiment. Magnus and Alice arrived at the command center, but the connection cut off, just as they were about to speak to Jo. Jo began hallucinating, seeing a cupboard with Alice's necklace, and began to panic. In the present, Jo heads off toward Alice, calling her. She finds a similar cabin in the woods and enters, only to find a sickly Alice in a cupboard. She carries Alice back to the original cabin, where Alice asks if she's a ghost. She takes care of Alice, running her a hot bath. When she goes to boil more water, she sees the original Alice in bed and the new Alice in the tub, and seems disoriented. She goes to check the tub but finds no one in it. Alice shows up behind, but she realizes this is not the Alice that was in the tub. Previously, Jo woke up to find that she had passed out and lost hours. On Earth, Henry told Irene that he had ordered rescue equipment for Soyuz 1. However, Irene told him this might not be necessary, as there was no sign of life. Jo continued to fix the escape pod and recorded a message to send to her family. While recording, she heard a noise coming from the ship. She listened to her recording in slow motion, hearing a man O's voice, which she recognized as Paul O's. The voice told her not to breathe. She went to check the ship and hallucinated that Paul was alive. She shook his hand, but it turned out to be his amputated arm. Joe managed to turn on the shuttle and heard a recorded message telling her to hurry as she didn't have enough time. The message reminded her to bring back the experiment. Henry arranged a rescue mission for Joe, but refused to talk about his twin brother when Irene questions if he heard from him. Henry O's twin brother, Bud, was on a ship on vacation and had an interview with a journalist about the space flight. The journalist pushed Bud to tell his opinion, but he snapped at her after realizing she thought he was Henry. Next, Joe managed to turn on the lights in Soyuz 1. She set the deorbit parameters for her shuttle's return after calculating them. She retrieved the experimental equipment and re-entered the shuttle. She recorded a final message to her family and launched the ship. However, the automatic detachment did not happen, as it needed to happen from inside the station. On Earth, everyone at the command center waited for the launch, which did not happen on time. Believing that Joe is dead, they said a little prayer for her, while Magnus and Alice grieved. A sudden shadowed figure appeared and helped the shuttle launch, helping Joe return to Earth. She looked out the window and saw the shadowed figure in the ship. As she detached the ship from its parts, she plummeted back to Earth, still having no contact with the command center. The command center was informed of Joe O's re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere and prepared to rescue her. Joe suddenly achieved contact with the command force, who celebrated after hearing her voice. Henry got confirmation of the experiment materials being received. Joe landed in a deserted area and managed to open the shuttle door. She was rescued by the soldiers who helped her out of the ship. As they wheeled Joe out of there, Joe reunited with Alice and Magnus. Henry received the capsule and discovered something on the iPad. Joe was taken to the helicopter where Alice and Magnus were sitting. She took Alice's hand, and for a moment, Alice hallucinated that there was no one on the ship, while Joe hallucinated the same. Returning to her normal self, she began speaking Swedish, which no one could understand. She thought that it was just stress, and rested her eyes. In the present, Joe demands to know where Alice is, even though Alice stands in front of her. She leaves the cabin, grabbing all her things, and telling Alice they need to find the other Alice before she freezes to death. Joe and Alice head through the snow, with Alice making a trail so they don't get lost, and Joe berating her for it. In the past, Joe eventually healed from the experiences of space travel. At a press conference, she expressed condolences to the widow of Paul. She spoke about her experience with space travel, telling the journalists that she missed Earth. Later, she spoke to Paul O's widow, but learned that her name was Frida, and not Erica. This confused Joe. Henry demonstrated the experiment results on Earth, but his assistant believed it could only happen in space. Meanwhile, Bud attended a convention, where he complained about how people treated him after his space mission. At Baikonur, an investigation took place, where the cause of the collision was being discussed. The commission reviewed the orbital videos and tried to discuss the cause of the accident. Joe mentioned the body of the USSR astronaut, but no one believed her. Instead, they questioned her order to check the oxygen, asking if she was checking if she was getting enough oxygen to her brain. Joe confirmed this, but said she had no symptoms of hypoxia before or after her mission. Next, Joe was given pills to take every day, which they called vitamins. At home, Joe had dinner with Magnus, but when she tried to take his hand, he distanced himself from her. Alice called out to Magnus and he rushed to her, leaving Joe feeling disoriented. Meanwhile, Bud debated his mission with a fellow author, Ian, and the author told him that his book about the mission had many inaccuracies. This angered Bud, but he controlled his temper in front of the audience. Henry tried to find the same signal he found when Joe initially landed. Alice also distanced herself from Joe, but helped her walk. Joe fell, due to her legs being swollen, and asked Alice to get Magnus. Dragging herself up, she hallucinated seeing the cupboard with Alice's necklace on it. Magnus appeared, bringing Joe out of her hallucination. The next morning, Joe appeared in front of the commission again, who tried to convince her that the station had been hit by an orange garbage bag. Joe disagreed, and the commission was confused further. Later, Alice played hide-and-seek, but while hiding, hallucinated someone stomping on her bunny toy. She went to stop the person but ended up finding no one. The commission told Jo that she had been hallucinating. After the meeting was adjourned, her boss, Frederick, tried to touch her face. However, she moved back in confusion, confusing him as he couldn't understand why she had forgotten everything between them. Confused and scared, she returned home to Magnus, who calmed her down. As he helped her undress, she professed her love for him, and the two became intimate. Alice swung alone outside, looking at her bunny. Henry joined her and told her about a theory in quantum mechanics, known as Schrödinger's cat. He told her that scientists used to believe that the world was governed by classical physics, until known scientists like Albert Einstein found that one substance could exist in two forms. He gave the example of a particle being black in one world and white in another. Between the two forms, there is an area where the particle is both black and white and does not want to decide on one side until observed. Henry had invented equipment to observe the middle ground and may have discovered something. However, he claimed it did not want to reveal itself. Jo asked Magnus if she seemed the same to him, and he revealed that he thought she had changed. The doorbell rang, and Jo opened it to find Henry and Alice. He thanked her for bringing the experiment home, and the two formally introduced themselves to each other. He reminded her that they had met, and she remembered he had been a part of the Apollo mission. Henry told Jo that the people who go to space eventually end up changing and need to look out for themselves. The team headed to the Memorial Alley, and Jo showed the team a photo of the spacesuit she saw in space. A team member pointed out that the woman in the photo was Irina, which shocked Jo. Visiting the tree that Paul planted before the space station mission, they placed flowers on top, and Jo asked for a moment alone with Paul's tree. Jo began crying, but then she suddenly hallucinated Paul standing in front of her. He told her his heart was still hanging in space. In front of the commission, Jo retracted her statement of the spacesuit body and agreed that it may have been a garbage bag. Jo returned home with her family and noticed inconsistencies in the house. She questioned Magnus about the car outside, stating that their car had been red, but he told her it had always been the color blue. Next, Henry and Irene get intimate. At the same time, Bud spoke to Ian and tried to convince him that Henry had been behind the Apollo mission failure. Ian had been confused, and in a fit of rage, Bud had thrown him off the ship. Henry caught a glimpse of Irene's dead self and panicked. Irene was scared, and Ian dropped into the ocean as the ship moved on. In the present, Jo and Alice continue walking. Alice tells Jo that sometimes when people are upset they can see things, so she doesn't believe there was another cabin. As the words of Alice hit her, Jo kneels next to Alice, confessing that she may not be Alice's mother. Having her suspicions confirmed, Alice confronts Jo about who her real mother is, but Jo stays silent, not sure what to tell her. The end. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like our channel and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. Also, let us know what movie you would love us to recap for you.